Hello everyone and welcome back to National 5 Biology, where we are continuing on with Key Area 2 of Unit 1, and that is the transport across the cell membrane. Today we are going to be finishing that key area and we will be looking at active transport. Now active transport is the movement of molecules across the cell membrane, but they are moving from an area of low concentration to high concentration. So they're going in the opposite direction. They're now moving against the concentration gradient. Because they are moving against the concentration gradient, it requires energy. So the previous two forms of transport that we have learned about, diffusion and osmosis, they are passive forms of transport. They move along or down the concentration gradient from an area of high concentration to low concentration. And because they move with the concentration gradient, they do not require energy, which is what makes them passive. Active transport is the opposite. It does require energy because it is going against that concentration gradient. And this is what active transport looks like. So, we have our cell membrane, we've got our phospholipids, and our carrier proteins. And here, let's say this is an ion, okay? So say that it's a sodium ion. This sodium ion, or these three sodium ions, are moving towards this carrier protein, where they are then sitting, sort of building up inside of the carrier protein. But the carrier protein is not open enough on this side here in order for the sodium molecule to actually push through. So that carrier protein actually needs to open up, and that requires energy. Now this ATP here, that is the name of an energy molecule. So ATP is energy. So the sodium molecules, the sodium ions, are sitting, building up in the carrier protein, but they cannot actually move through it. That is a mechanical, physical movement that requires energy. So energy needs to be supplied in order for active transport to happen. Once active transport does start to happen and energy is supplied to the carrier protein, the molecules are able to move through. So here we have 3 on this side. So this is low concentration of sodium ions. And then over here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 16, I believe. Okay, so this is high concentration. Now, if this was flipped the other way and we wanted the molecules to move out of the cell to the low concentration, then they would just be able to move through a channel protein. Okay, they would move naturally, passively on their own. However, this is going against the concentration gradient. So these carrier proteins actually need to work as a pump. So it's not just an open channel for the ions or molecules to move through, it actually needs to open and close to pump them through. So the sodium molecules will just start to gather here, and then the top part here is going to close, and then this bottom part will open up, allowing the molecules to move through. And then that action will reverse. So what will then happen is this part down the bottom closes, and then the top will open again, allowing the molecules to gather. And it's a sort of open and closing mechanism that actually forces the molecules to move through the cell membrane against that concentration gradient. Now, because the movement against that concentration gradient actually requires the physical opening and closing of the carrier proteins, it does require energy. Okay, so another example that we could have had here is this could have been a potassium ion. So you've got your Na plus and K plus, so sodium and potassium. And that is a very common carrier protein. So we have the sodium and potassium pump. and that moves these two molecules backwards and forwards across the cell membrane, as is necessary. But active transport can also be used for glucose molecules. Now, glucose is moved by diffusion, but eventually, once we've started to digest our food, and we've got lots of glucose in our small intestines, for example, eventually, as that glucose has started to move that by diffusion, the bloodstream is going to have a higher concentration of glucose than the intestine does. But we don't want any of that to go to waste. We need glucose, so we want all of it to be put to good use. So eventually, those glucose molecules will move, they'll continue to move from the intestine into the bloodstream against the concentration gradient, and they will move by active transport. So glucose can move by both diffusion and active transport. To summarise this lesson, active transport is the movement of molecules from low concentration to high concentration, which is against the concentration gradient. This requires energy and is facilitated by carrier proteins in the cell membrane. Ions like sodium and potassium move by active transport. Okay everyone, I hope that this lesson has been helpful to you, whether you are learning for the first time or revising. And that is us finished Key Area 2, Transport Across the Cell Membrane. So the next lesson will be introducing DNA and proteins. Take care everyone, and I will see you in the next one.